Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? In which they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past. I'm Sarah Ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'm joined by guest Elizabeth Bonnemann, who is going to talk with me about The Time Meddler, a 4-episode serial of season 2 of the classic original Doctor Who. So would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and about why you suggested this particular piece of media?
Yes. So I have more than a passing interest in medieval history. It's what I will major in when I have enough money to go back to college. Mm-hmm. But I am also like neck deep in the lore of Doctor Who. Like it's one of my passions. I know it better than anyone I know. And so when I found out that you had never seen an episode before, I was like, we should watch some Doctor Who.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've dropped into medieval Europe like on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
And this is the first where there's surviving footage. Mm-hmm. They went a few earlier times, but the BBC in the 60s did not have a good track record of keeping track of their tapes.
Right. Right.
They would wipe them and use them for other shows without thinking, oh, maybe we want to save this. Maybe we want to revisit it someday.
Yeah.
They changed the policy in like 72, but by that point the damage was done.
I guess Doctor Who always seemed very daunting in the sense that there's just so much of it. I was never quite sure where to start because there obviously to some extent is the wisdom in starting at the beginning, but I also met people who had very strong feelings that you shouldn't for some reason.
Well, again, starting at the beginning is difficult because so much of the first 6 seasons is lost.
Yeah.
So it's like you watch the first 3 serials and then the 4th serial is just gone. So
yeah, so you have these weird gaps.
Yeah. And then you come back into it and it's like, oh, there's new people here. Where have they come from?
Right. Yeah. And it was interesting coming in, not having seen any of it. And all of a sudden there's these people and they're referring to other people that are gone. And it's like, all right.
People who literally left in the previous episode. So.
Right. Yeah. But I didn't watch the previous episode. I just watched these.
Right.
Episodes,
which is fair. I mean, it's a lot to watch.
But it was fun, and I could see going back and watching more at some point. But just in terms of timing, I did not have time to watch everything in existence leading up to this. So as I said, just started.
Fair. I haven't either, and this is a thing that I just do.
So the Time Meddler stars, I would say the main people are William Hartnell, who is the first Doctor, I believe, yes?
Yes, he is the originator of the role. William Hartnell was known in the 50s as an action movie actor who is usually played like, thuggish villain roles. So this is like honestly a major departure for him. Like, a big part of the reason why he took the role is like, I want to have something my grandkids can watch.
Right. So we have his 2 companions currently in this serial are Vicky, played by Maureen O'Brien, and Stephen Taylor, played by Peter Purves. Do you know?
I honestly have no idea how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
I've pronounced it Purves just because that's how it looks, but I have no idea.
Yeah. Purves for anyone who wants to look it up. And then the meddling monk played by Peter Butterworth.
Yes. And I don't know any of the rest of them from anything. Well, Peter Purves, or however we're pronouncing it, was a presenter on children's show at one point. But that's all I know about any of their careers. So
we can kind of get into the episode. So I'll start with a very brief recap, and then you can go ahead and give us a little bit of background.
Yes, because we're starting near the end of the 2nd season, so stuff has happened before this, and Sarah sent me some notes, and she's like, I am very confused. I don't know these people, and I don't know what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
Which, fair.
Yeah. So I'll be asking you some questions throughout, I imagine, but you can also provide some brief background. So first of all, the basic premise for anyone I'm sure there must at least be one other person in the world who has not watched Doctor Who.
Yeah. For you 3.
Right. The basic premise seems to be that a human passing alien Time Lord, known as the Doctor, is exploring across time and space in the TARDIS, which stands for Time and Relative Dimension in Space. which is a combined time machine and spaceship, right? They go around in time, but they also go to different places.
Right. It's a time machine spaceship. It's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Right. It looks like a 1963 police box, which is a police telephone box, which as a creative choice, it's to make it very distinct, but the reason in universe why it always looks like that is there's a part of the TARDIS called the chameleon circuit, which is supposed to blend it in with its surroundings. So like if it appeared on the beach, it's supposed to look like a large rock. If it appeared in the example that the Doctor gives is if it appeared in Imperial India, it might look like a howdah, like the things that you ride in on the back of an elephant. And if it lands in a junkyard in 1963 London, it might look like a police telephone box. Right. But the chameleon circuit breaks in the very first episode, so like it's in this junkyard. It looks like a police box. All's well and good. He takes off. The next episode, he lands in the Stone Age. It still looks like a police box, and he's like, it's not supposed to do that.
Right, so you have it very much being something that's super distinct. It's
been established since then that like the Doctor knows how to fix it by this point if he wanted to, but he's also gotten used to it, and also if he fixed it now, he would never remember where he parked.
Which adds to the kind of dynamic of the Doctor as being this sort of elderly man, even though I assume even when he looks younger in like other incarnations, he's still at heart a very old man. Right. In this particular serial, he and his current companions, Vicky and Stephen, arrive in England in 1066, shortly before the Norman invasion, and find themselves in conflict with a fellow time traveler disguised as a monk, who travels through time attempting to either change history or use historical knowledge to his own advantage. And they basically have to stop him from trying to prevent the Norman conquest. So do you want to give a little background about other things we should know in terms of where we are and who these people are?
When we got to this point, in the previous serial, Vicky, she's human, but she's sort of the Doctor's adopted granddaughter, was traveling with the Doctor and a pair of school teachers named Ian and Barbara, who come from 1963. And the Doctor can't steer the TARDIS. Like he has no real control over where he ends up in space and time. So Ian and Barbara have been traveling with the Doctor, and they've enjoyed their travels. But when they, by chance, end up in 1960s London again, they're like, we don't know when we're going to hit this again, so we're going to go now. Thank you for everything, Doctor. We hope to see you again someday. And so they leave. Also in the previous serial, they were caught in the crossfire between this war between these two cyborg robot races, the Daleks and the Mechanoids. And they rescued a prisoner of the Mechanoids named Stephen Taylor, who they discover at the start of this serial has stowed away in the TARDIS because he has nowhere else to go.
Okay. So, and is he human?
He is human.
Okay.
Most of the companions are human, at least to this point, with the exception of the Doctor's granddaughter, who was his very first companion, who left some time ago. But that's where we are currently.
Okay.
Vicky's been with him a while. Stephen is new.
Yeah. Okay. And it does also help that you were telling me earlier that Vicky is supposed to be much younger than she looks. The actual actress is in her 20s. She looks like she's in her 20s. Yeah. But is apparently supposed to be a teenager.
Yeah. She was an orphan from a starship crash, and she was like recently orphaned, and the Doctor recently, like, his granddaughter opted to stay behind on 22nd Century Earth because she fell in love with a resistance fighter. And so they meet and they kind of fill this void that they each have in each other's lives. Like the Doctor is like a parental figure to her. She's like the granddaughterly figure to him. So he essentially adopts her.
Yeah, and so that definitely, I would say, kind of helps because there's this weirdly sort of infantilizing dynamic, but knowing both that she's younger and also that she's an orphan and that he's recently had this granddaughter that he's lost, that makes it a little less weird.
It makes sense in context. I can see how it would come off as a little weird without the context.
Yeah, so that definitely seems slightly odd. She also, every now and then, seems a little, like, not super bright. Like, she has a lot of trouble remembering what TARDIS stands for.
Well, yeah, it's it's something that doesn't really come up much. And,
No, I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little odd, but it helps a little bit definitely to know the context. So Stephen and the fact that he's one of the companions is actually brand new in this episode. I guess we met him in the previous episode, but it's only at the beginning of this one that we learned that he's stowed away on the ship and is hanging out. And he then refuses to believe that the TARDIS is in fact a time machine. And so there's a big subplot in the beginning of these couple episodes, basically just of him being slowly convinced that he's actually traveled back in time.
Yeah, he's fairly slow to accept this. He's like, it's like, all right, Doc, I buy that it's a spaceship, but time travel, really?
Come on.
Come on. Sure, it's bigger on the inside, but it can't really travel in time, can it?
Right, but we of course know that they've traveled in time. I mean, you certainly would know if you had previously watched Doctor Who, but also you know because they meet a woman who's very dirty, and that is the universal signal in film and television for we're back in the Middle Ages.
Uh-huh.
She is talking to her husband and another villager, and they are concerned about this mysterious large box that has appeared on the shore and are going to investigate.
Which, fair enough. It sticks out like a sore thumb anywhere it goes.
Yeah. Except, I guess, 1960s England.
Yeah, well, yes.
The doctor finds what he deems to be a Viking helmet, which I will be discussing more in a later segment.
Yeah.
And based on this, places them in 11th and 12th century England.
Yeah, and there's a brilliant line, because it's the classical depiction of a Viking helmet with horns. And he's like, there, a Viking helmet. What do you make of that? And Stephen, who still doesn't believe that they've traveled in time, is like, well, maybe. It's like, what do you mean, maybe? What do you think it is? A space helmet for a cow?
Right. Which is a great line.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Then we also see this monk in the distance. And so at first, just watching this, I assume, okay, the monk is looking at this box and trying to figure out what's going on, and he's confused. But then we see he actually tries to enter the TARDIS, and he's kind of smirking about something. And he also goes and does the standard motion for looking at a watch, but there isn't actually a watch there.
And he's worried about this, oh no, I dropped my watch.
Yeah. So you're definitely looking at this thing and saying, okay, this is not a real 11th century monk here.
Yeah. Something's off.
The doctor leaves Vicky and Stephen to hang out by the TARDIS while he goes and investigates. I believe you tell me he gets better. I'm not fond of Stephen in most of this serial.
I'm not either.
Including this weird scene where he basically bullies Vicky into walking up a mountain with him. And she's like, I just want to stay by the TARDIS like the doctor told us to. And he half drags her to go around and explore more, which she doesn't want to do. And it's very frustrating.
Which, it's like the doctor's like, stay here. I'll find something, and then you can come and meet me. And then it's he walks off down the beach, and immediately once he's out of sight, Stephen's like, okay, let's scale this cliff.
Right. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. And he's like, no, we're going to do this. So yeah, that's definitely not a great dynamic.
Yeah. Stephen has been a prisoner of the mechanoids for several years. He has forgotten how to people.
Yeah, that helps a little, that he has a reason to have forgotten how to people. But he does not relate well to anyone. Yeah, it's not great. So the doctor gets trapped by the medieval lady, who I think her name is going to be Edith. We don't learn that for 2 episodes, but...
well, we learn it next episode. But,
it's the next episode? Okay.
The doctor isn't great about asking people's names. Of course, that's also because then that would raise the question of what his name is, and he doesn't have a name. His name is the Doctor, and that might raise more questions than he is willing to answer.
Right. Yeah, although, I feel like in this time, if he just said just call me doctor, I feel like that might pass more than it might in some other places. I could see that.
Fair.
Yeah. And so he's chatting with her. She quickly kind of is won over. She gives him some mead, and we hear these monks singing in their monastery, which is a ruined hovel, because of the also very traditional thing that you see in media, where medieval monasteries are already in ruins a decade after they've been built.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the story is this monastery was abandoned after a Viking raid or something,
Right.
which wouldn't account for this level of decay, but it does explain why no one's living there.
Right. So there's some weird stuff that I'll talk about later in terms of their awareness of the monastery and of the monk or monks who are or should be there. So we hear the monks singing, and there's this kind of odd fluctuation in the chants and so because of this, the doctor asks and learns this thing about, that the monastery has been deserted for a number of years and the monks have only recently moved back in, but that they've only actually ever seen or met one of them.
Yeah.
Which is suspicious.
A little bit.
The doctor also, through his conversation with her, is able to figure out that they are in Northumbria in 1066, which is great because he's like, when did good King Edward die? I can't quite remember.
It's averting that like trope of like time travelers like going up to the first person they see and saying, "What year is this?" And instead he's like cleverly using context clues to figure out where and when he is.
Yeah. So that I thought worked really well. The part that's much clumsier is that he's like, "So are we in Northumbria?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I didn't know if we'd cross the border," which is like not a very medieval way of putting it in for this particular regions especially. So that was a bit clumsier, but finding out the date, he did a quite good job of.
Yes.
Stephen, meanwhile, has of course managed to get them completely lost.
Oh yeah.
And also then ends up fighting some random medieval man and then grabbing a watch off him. And this then encourages his insistence that, look, this guy has a watch. We're not really in 10th century England. And it's like, oh, we're in the 11th. Come on. But the watch is a good, getting a watch off a medieval villager is a good clue that something at least is going on. But we obviously know that it must be the monk's clearly missing watch.
Uh-huh.
We then find another odd modern piece of technology, or at least modern to the 1960s when this came out. I think I forgot to say that earlier. This came out, I think, 1964?
This one's 65.
65. So the doctor makes it to the monastery, and instead of the singing monks, he follows these sounds, and it leads him to a phonograph, a item which I did not remember what was called, and definitely just wrote down in my notes the Flower record player and decided that I would look that up later.
You're not wrong.
It's also, I don't know if you saw those memes that were going around at some point of, I think they were like items from like Antiques Roadshow or one of those sort of shows, with like ridiculous captions. And one of them was a phonograph and the caption was just "loud flower."
I love that. I have not seen that before, but I love it.
I highly recommend looking them up. A lot of them are super fun, but I saw this item and that was the only thing I could think of was "loud flower."
Mm-hmm.
But he is then trapped by the monk who laughs maniacally, which is what the episode ends on.
The monk, later on we find out that the monk thinks he's in the right, but with if you're laughing maniacally, dude, you're not the good guy. That's not how this works.
And it's also bizarre because we'll talk more about the monk and his motivations later, but some of them are very altruistic, but some of them are very much not.
Also, based on the way that time travel works, he's also just wrong in how all this works, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts too about whether what he's doing would actually even accomplish what he thought it would accomplish, but
but we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah. So we open in the next episode on the monk prepping an extremely 20th century English breakfast, but I assume that's intentional.
Yeah, he's got an electric toaster. He's got one of those little griddles that you make eggs on. He's got a whole 1965 kitchen set up in this in a room in this monastery. Nothing like. Well, I should say, he doesn't have a full-on electric fridge or anything, but he's got a portable griddle, a portable toaster. It's he's got a portable kitchen.
Yeah, and it's very much the dynamic for a lot of this is very much how would he explain any of this if somebody came into the monastery?
Very much so.
And there's this odd implication that, well, I guess nobody ever has until somebody will in these episodes. The villagers will. But it is this kind of odd, I mean, so again, this is something I'll talk about later, but it's unlikely that he would have been that successful in being quite that isolated.
Yeah. They know he's there. They know where to go to knock on his door. Like, they've never gone inside and seen all of this.
And he's always done, like, a very good job, apparently, of, like, opening the door just a teeny tiny crack and, like, taking a basket of food and then been like, gotta get back to my solitary contemplation. And they never think this is weird.
Nope, not once. until the end when they do. But
right. The doctor is sulking and not very happy, which is fair. Yeah. And throws at the monk what I feel like can only be a bucket of urine.
Yeah, it's like, I guess it's his chamber pot, his bedpan probably.
Yeah.
But an interesting note about this particular episode. So I was reading up on some trivia. William Hartnell actually had the week off. So they just had a couple of pre-recorded lines for that scene, and so he's just locked in a room this whole episode, and we just see Vicky and Steven and the monk and everyone else running around doing their thing, but the doctor is out of action for the episode.
Which is interesting, because I noticed that it was like this sort of odd dynamic that I assumed was just stylistic and not, the mundane reason that he just had a week off.
Yeah, William Hartnell was on vacation for a week.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, so it's interesting, this dynamic that, like, he obviously is in many ways the center, but you go this entire episode without actually seeing him.
Yeah, and like, it also, like, it's always been said that, like, the companions are just as important characters as the doctor. Like, in these early episodes, there's even through the cycle of companions, there's like a very recognizable, like, dynamic between the different companions, because like there's the doctor, who is an old man who since William Hartnell is not in the best physical shape, like that's why they got him a couple of companions. It's like there's one or two adult companions to do all the action-y stuff, and then a child who is like supposed to be relatable to the kids watching. So like so like the adults, that you first had Ian and Barbara, then you have Steven, then later you have Ben and Polly, and then like for the kids you first have Susan, then you have Vicky, and then you have Dodo. And so like this dynamic like remains stable for most of the first Doctor's time on the show, until he regenerates into a younger man and can do action scenes himself. So that's sort of like the meta reason why there are companions, because like William Hartnell's an old man, can't really do all that much.
Right. So if you want to have action sequences, you need these younger actors who are able to handle that. You
need your Ians and your Barbaras and your Stevens.
Yeah. Interesting. Speaking of, Vicky and Steven are busy arguing about the watch, and Steven is being a real asshole yet again.
Oh, yeah.
And they are then captured by the medieval villagers.
Yep.
The monk, meanwhile, is sitting around basically being grumpy about his lost watch, at which point Edith and a friend of hers bring him this, like, giant basket of food.
Yes.
And this is another one of these moments. They, like, bring him this, like, donation, which feels like, I mean, depending on how many people contributed to it, like, it actually is pretty substantial in terms of their,
it's a lot of food for one guy. Like, I know he's keeping up the pretense that there are more people here, but what's he doing with that food? Like,
and it's kind of obnoxious that you're just taking food from all of these people, and there's no way you can eat yourself.
Yeah, like, I mean, I guess he's feeding the doctor, but like, he wasn't before the doctor showed up.
Yeah. And he's clearly been doing this for like at least, I don't know, like a couple of months or so.
A while.
Yeah.
Like I think the quoted figure is a few weeks, which is it's not an insignificant chunk of time.
Yeah. He also makes just all of these really pointed comments about how much he likes solitude until they leave.
Yes, that scene was funny. It's like, but today is a day for solitary contemplation, because you can tell that they've interrupted him when he was about to go and do something for his master plan that we find out about later. Right.
He does something after this that really looked to me like he was snorting cocaine, but I feel like that can't possibly be what he was doing.
I think, based on the context and the fact that it's 1965 British television, it's snuff tobacco.
Oh, that makes much more sense.
Yeah, because I cannot imagine that heavy drug use would fly in mid-60s English television.
Right. I'm like, I know he's not supposed to be a good guy, but
especially what is billed as a children's show. Like,
right. Yeah.
No, I think not.
Stuff tobacco, good to know. Yeah, because I was like, this can't possibly be what they're going for, but that's definitely what it looks like. And he also, with his modern binoculars, spies a Viking longboat and is suddenly very happy about the arrival of the Vikings. And I'm just sitting here being like, good, maybe the Vikings will kill Stephen, because I really hate him at this point.
They don't.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry.
Spoiler alert, everybody.
Stephen stays around for a while. He actually outlasts like 4 other companions, but...
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He does leave eventually, don't worry.
I mean, you also said that he like gets better.
He does get better. He improves significantly once he's had time to, acclimate to people again.
Right. So now that all the villagers are accusing him of being a Viking spy, he finally is like, oh, I guess this is pretty authentic Saxon, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, yeah, now you believe in time travel.
Well, I think at this point he's like, yeah, okay, if this was a charade, it is far too elaborate to be not real at this point. Like, okay, I buy it. Right,
like this is way too much for a costume party.
Yeah, it's like even the moon landing hoax.
Right. Would be, less elaborate than this.
Right.
The medieval Lady Edith figures out that they know the doctor and then kind of vouches for them and convinces the men. There's her and she has this friend, and otherwise there are no other women in the village.
There's only like 3 named Saxon villagers. Like,
right.
There's Edith, there's her husband Wulfnoth, who is like the head of the village, and then there's Eldrad, who is very vocal that he is certain that Stephen and Vicky are Viking spies.
Yes.
And like he's like we should hang them now. We should kill them now. Just and Wulfnoth's like, calm down, Eldrad. Calm down.
Yeah, and one of his justifications for this is that they're wearing weird clothing, which my immediate reaction was definitely like, yeah, but it's not Viking clothing. Like, they'd know what the Viking clothing was. Right. But then I actually saw the Viking clothing. Yes,
that's a thing that happens.
Yeah, the Viking clothing is ridiculous.
It's pretty bad.
Like, I think there's a tunic that has ruffles at some point, and then there's just a lot of, like, studded items.
A lot of studded items.
Yeah, and then also, like, there's this one guy who's got, like, a bowl cut with a ponytail and a Civil War-era mustache.
Yeah, and another one who has, like, a ponytail, one of those ponytails that goes straight up.
Yep. Yeah, it's just like, okay, it's like, it really felt like one of those bits where it's like, okay, maybe you don't have the highest budget, maybe you just like raided like the like BBC prop closet.
Oh yeah,
that's closet, and like
a lot of like early Doctor Who is very low budget. Like, yeah. So that's probably what happened, but still, it's not great. One of them's got an eagle on his helmet. That's not a
right. Yeah,
that's not a Viking thing. That's like a 18th century Prussian thing.
Right.
They raided the BBC costume department and they're like, oh, this looks good.
Right. It's a lot of shit that looks like it's from like some opera set vaguely in the past.
Yeah, like the Ring Cycle or something.
Right.
Which I think was Vikings, come to think of it, in that one.
Viking-ish,
yeah. Yeah, Viking-ish. Yeah. But anyway.
The leader gives Sven a very detailed explanation of how they're just here to like sneak around and find information and they shouldn't be seen and it's not a regular raiding mission, which is very clearly like for the benefit of the audience and just like not a conversation that would have happened.
Yeah, it's also hilarious because like the minute they come across any people, they immediately they're like, fuck stealth, attack.
Right, yeah, it's like you have this whole thing about what they're supposed to be doing and they don't even do it.
Quiet scouting mission. Hey, look, a person!
But it's also, the whole thing is sort of silly because, like, do they expect that this random villager in the middle of nowhere is, like, gonna call King Harold on the phone and, like, let him know that, like, the Vikings are there? Like,
yeah.
it doesn't really matter.
It really doesn't.
although the medieval people are definitely too dumb to think it's weird that there's only one monk, Stephen does figure out that this is suspicious.
Yeah, and that means the medieval people are especially dumb because Stephen is not that bright.
No, Stephen is definitely dumb.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Stephen then thinks that he has tricked the monk into giving him a description of the doctor when Stephen never gave him a description of the doctor, so that he's like produced all this information. And Stephen's like, aha, I tricked him, and now I know he has the doctor somewhere. And Vicky's definitely like, I feel like you're not as smart as you think you are, and he wants you to have to think that you tricked him.
She's like, no, it's definitely a trap.
Which obviously makes sense, and she's also obviously right, but it's also vaguely unclear exactly what the point of the trap is, except just to make sure, I guess, that they don't bother him.
I think it's like him locking up the doctor. He like recognizes that like they do not come from this time, so yeah. I should like make sure they do not interfere in my plans by locking them up.
Yeah.
Which I can see where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it doesn't not make sense on his part.
It's like okay, I'm going to lock them up and keep them fed with this overabundance of food that I have, and
at least somebody's eating it,
and they will stay out of my way, at least in theory.
You know, yeah, if it had worked out, might have been a good plan for him.
Yeah.
So the Vikings arrive on schedule, or as they say, schedule.
Schedule. It's an English show.
Yeah. No, it's just Iowa. It's one of the few like British pronunciations that I always find like very jarring for some reason, even though I like have seen many like British things.
Oh, it's especially jarring. Like this is a bit of a digression, but like much later on, like in the revival series, there's a character named Captain Jack Harkness, who was played by an actor named John Barrowman. Now, John Barrowman is originally from Scotland, but he grew up in Illinois. So he has an American accent, but every once in a while he'll bust out a British pronunciation like schedule. And like in it, the American accent, it is especially jarring.
Yeah, no, that sounds very weird.
Like, what's the line? Estrogen. like this man is like talking in this very American accent, and then suddenly he says the word estrogen.
Right.
Like, all right. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, the other one is that always, like, I remember the first time I went to a lecture that was given by a British person who said Byzantine, and I was like, the what?
The what now? It's the first time I've heard that one.
So the Vikings arrive on schedule, and the one who has an eye patch attacks Edith.
Yeah. The one with the eye patch.
The one with the eye patch.
Yep.
She is clearly concussed, but does revive just enough to be able to tell everybody that, no, it's not those travelers that Eldred was so gung-ho about killing. It's like the actual Vikings. So they go off to go and look to the Vikings. And there is this battle, which is extremely low budget and not very well done. Gosh, it's like when my sister and I were kids and she would try to jump on me. It's very like small confined set. Oh yes, it's a fairly tiny soundstage, like, and you got about 10 to 12 people just kind of trying to jump on each other, essentially. Right. Yeah, and like awkwardly kind of hitting each other, and it just all looks very overtly fake. Oh yeah, and the whole idea of Doctor Who having a budget really came with the revival in 2005. And that's really the charm of some of these like older BBC shows, like sure. I, Claudius, like, which I love, like, or Blackadder. Yeah. But there's actually like a beautiful line in a much later episode with the fourth Doctor where the BBC like owns this quarry that they like reuse over and over again for like, you know, we're in a rocky place. Yeah. So at one point, the doctor lands in this place, and his companion Romana's like, okay, let's see where we are then. And she turns on the viewfinder, and the doctor's like, oh look, rocks. So yeah, it's definitely very classic, like that era of like, BBC when there's like no budget to speak of. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's very that. Yeah. The Saxons do manage to kill the Viking leader, but the Vikings have wounded Eldred. Yes. And they bring him to the monastery, apparently the first time they have tried to go into the monastery. And their arrival distracts the faux monk from his attempts to trap Stephen and Vicky, who then unimpeded are able to find where the doctor is being kept, but he's already gone. So therefore we still have not seen him.
Yeah, and then that's the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Apparently the doctor has been up to something. He's been escaping.
Apparently. The monk, as the next episode begins, sends Eldred and Wulfnoth to lie down and promises that he'll come back. They still have not noticed that there are no other monks, so he's just like, I'm gonna leave you here and then I'll be back. And I feel like at this point they really should be asking, like, isn't there somebody else who could, like, help out? You seem very busy.
Yeah, they have not caught on one bit, and, like, they've heard the singing. They should think that there are other people here.
Right. Yeah, it's not like he's like a hermit and he's supposed to be the only one there.
Yeah, like it would make more sense if he had passed himself off as a hermit. Like,
yes, it would.
But
he didn't.
But he didn't.
But they still do not seem to be worried about this. Vicky suggests that the doctor must have escaped through a secret passage, basically because castles and monasteries have that sort of thing.
Yep. And you can tell that she's even grasping at straws here. And Stephen, like, she's like, you know, in case of siege or fire or something. And Stephen's just like, really? And for once I'm with Stephen, like, really?
On the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, like, they did enter into a locked cell, and it does look like there's somebody who, like, wants somebody.
That is
like,
true.
Yeah,
that is
so it's
true.
like he had to get out somehow.
Yeah.
And
then they find it, and then they find the secret passage, which proves that Vicky was right anyway. So
yeah. To which Stephen responds, "Who's a clever girl then?" Which is, I feel like, something that you would say to, like,
a dog.
Yeah, or like a child, like, under 7.
Yeah, and Vicky's not that young.
Yeah.
Like she's younger than she looks, but she's not that young.
Right. I mean, so she's supposed to be like, 15, 16?
Yeah, roughly thereabouts.
Maybe? Yeah, but yeah, it's this kind of odd bit where, like, a lot of the scenes, like, make more sense when you think of her at that age, but then there's every now and then there's these bits where it's like you would think that she is like an actual child. In terms of how the men relate to her.
Yeah.
The monk goes to smugly check on his prisoner and finds that he's gone. And meanwhile, poor Wulfnoth just really wants this monk to, like, make sure his friend doesn't die. And the monk's just like, this is not my problem. I've got a whole other thing going on.
Yeah. Like, I feel like at this point, Wulfnoth is the only person with, like, his priorities in order.
Right? But on the other hand, people clearly make very speedy, miraculous recoveries, because so the doctor, after he escapes, goes to Edith, who, despite the fact that she clearly must have had a concussion, now appears to be 100% recovered and very chill, and, like, offers him some venison.
And also, like, she makes reference to the fact that she seems to be the only woman in the village. All the men folk have gone. I'm all here all alone. Like, all the men folk are out hunting for Vikings. And
I'm the only woman in this village. Like, how the early English reproduced themselves is, like, a mystery to me based on watching this.
Yeah, like, there's clearly an imbalance here.
Yeah. He then also, for some reason, like, explains to her, he's like, don't worry, Harold's gonna defeat the Vikings. Oh, but then he's gonna get his ass kicked by William the Conqueror. And she's like, what?
Yeah, like, that is literally, like, sort of her reaction. She's like, what? You know this? But the doctor, in typical doctor fashion, is like, but I have no time to explain. I must go back to the monastery.
Right. So, yes, there's a lot of, like, back and forth between the monastery and, like, not in the monastery. So he's going back to the monastery. And meanwhile, Stephen and Vicky have escaped the monastery via the secret passage.
Yes.
Stephen has finally decided he's on board with the fact that they did definitely go back in time, but also feels like there has to be something up with the monk and that he also does not belong here.
Yeah, because they found the phonograph. They found the kitchen.
Yeah. The monk finally tends to this dude's wounds. And in terms of people now just being, like, very chill about bringing modern things into this medieval setting, he just gives Eldred some penicillin. And Wulfnoth's like, what's that?
It's a type of herb.
Don't worry about it. And then Wolfnath is like, he's lost a lot of blood. And then the monk is like, yes, if only I could give him a blood transfusion. And it's like, what?
Yeah, at this point, Wolfnath's like, wait, what? and the monk's like, don't worry about it.
Yeah, so he's then, he like kind of wanders off again, is very happy, and leaves this poor man completely unattended, again, not leading anyone to wonder why there are no other monks who could help out with this.
Yep.
There's then a bit of like a comedy of errors when it's everybody sort of wanders in and out of the monastery.
Pretty much.
Edith and Wolfnath are basically like promise like, oh, we'll come to the monastery all the time to help because of course Eldred can't be moved and has to stay there, which the monk clearly does not think is something he's on board with and does not want them to be there. It's
like, I have this plan. I also have this whole modern living situation set up, and now I have a Saxon in
just
my
like
living
chilling.
room. Yeah, he's just there.
He's also, by the way, like not on a bed. He's like laid in a stone alcove.
Yeah, he's like, it's like lay him down on the slab. This is a good place for a wounded man. Yeah.
Right. But there probably isn't another bed because he's the only person living there and the monastery has been deserted.
Except there is a bed in the cell where he was keeping the doctor, but that's neither here nor there.
Right. And I feel like, like trapping him in a cell might be a bad look.
I mean, yes.
The Vikings and their bizarre outfits decide that they're going to go hide in the monastery.
There's only two of them left. There's Sven and I think the other one's name is Ulf.
Yeah, sounds right.
Yeah. Sven is like, okay, I figured out how we're gonna get out of here and survive all these Saxons looking for us. And no, I have that backwards. Ulf is the one who's like, okay, I have everything planned out so that we can survive and get back to the army. And Sven's like, wow, you put more thought into saving your own skin than you did into the actual mission.
Right. So it's just weird, okay, so there's wimpy Viking and then brave Viking is what they're going with here.
Viking who wants to survive and Viking who is honorable.
Right. Viking who's didn't we have a job? Our leaders report back and he's like, our leader's dead, don't worry about it.
It's if we make it back to the army, what will the king say?
Yeah, and it also then adds to the what was the point of this mission if they're presenting it now as being so pointless that if they never come back, it doesn't at all matter.
Yeah. Even though this mission was just explained in excruciating detail to us, it makes no sense.
Yeah. The monk, so the doctor comes back and has a stick, which he pretends is a gun and is therefore able to kind of hold up the monk at gunpoint.
I have a Winchester 73, and this is another cue that the monk does not belong in this time because he knows what that means.
Yeah, they do that. We also see the monk's truly insane, amazing checklist.
Yes.
It's written in handwriting that looks like it's a daily schedule for a kindergarten class.
Uh-huh. It's very clear. It doesn't look like my handwriting at all, so you can read it.
It is extremely legible and includes such items as use atomic cannon on the Vikings. It seems to be the upcoming thing.
Yep.
And then so it just lists various other things that are mostly real historical events that are going to happen with or without him.
Yeah.
But then finally ends with meet King Harold.
Yep. King Harold will totally know that I am responsible for this.
Yeah, which is weirdly adorable. That his it makes it look like his ultimate goal is just to meet King Harold and have Harold thank him.
Which, to be fair, I would love the chance to meet King Harold.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I have a soft spot in my heart for Harold Godwinson, but yeah.
You and the monk alike. The monk clearly is really into Harold Godwinson.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not into Harold Godwinson enough to do what the monk is trying to do, but
right. You wouldn't go back in time and prevent the Norman conquest, really?
No. I like my language the way it is, thank you.
Yeah, have you read Beowulf? We don't want that.
Oh God.
Thank God we had the Norman conquest.
Uh-huh.
So the monk manages to then knock out the one Viking, and the doctor actually knocks out the other. So they've dealt with their Viking issue for the time being.
They do it the same way. they sneak up behind them and hit them over with the head with a stick that breaks in half like from the force of the blow. It's like the same method, like whack.
Right, and then it's also like these people like have been terrorizing England for centuries. Like,
no one thought to concuss them with a stick.
Right, like it's just like, really? Like this is like the best the Vikings have to offer? Is these dudes?
Yeah. I guess. This is the Viking advance force. It's no wonder Harold beat them.
Right, exactly. It's like, well, I guess this is why this is like the end of the age of the Vikings. And then also Stephen and Vicky arrive back at the monastery, which they literally like, they leave the monastery, get out of the secret passage, and then immediately turn around and go back.
They're like, well, there's nowhere else to go in this area. Let's go back to the monastery.
And Vicky's like, we just left the monastery. And Stephen's like, no, it makes sense. Everything's about the monastery.
Yeah, it's like, well, everything weird is about the monk. Like, so let's go back and find the monk again.
Which does make sense, but it's also just like
sense,
this, like, it
also
feels very like, okay, but like, why did you leave? Like,
yeah.
And then as they arrive, they then find that the monk has a TARDIS of his own disguised as a Saxon altar.
Yes. Yeah, and this is actually like a really big deal within the history of the show. Because prior to this, like, okay, there's this weird alien guy who has a time machine. This is really wacky and special. And like, this is the episode that establishes for the very first time that there are other time traveling aliens of his species with TARDISes. Like, he is not the only one.
Right, which is interesting.
Yeah. So that's kind of like a big like, whoa, this is a thing.
Yeah, because I definitely would have assumed that he was the only one, again, not knowing anything about Doctor Who.
Right. So yeah, the monk is the first Time Lord. We don't find out that they're called Time Lords until season 6, but he's the first Time Lord besides the Doctor and his granddaughter that we've ever met.
Right. He is a very, let's see, how can I put this? He's a very, like, I don't know, he likes to have souvenirs, clearly, at least, and like...
He does. He's got, it's like, well, Vicky's like, he's got something from every time and every place, which is an exaggeration, but he's got like a lot of stuff.
Yeah, like, he's got a lot of cool statues. Nice. He has a neutron bomb.
He has a whole case of neutron bombs.
Yep. And they also find his, like, very detailed journals,
yes.
One of which he claims that he explained airplanes to Da Vinci.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and Stephen's like, and then Da Vinci invented a flying machine, and also sort of wins me over by saying that Da Vinci lived in the Middle Ages, which I'll talk about more later, and why I appreciated that, what most people would consider an error.
Yeah. Da Vinci, also appears in, like, a later... No, I tell a lie. There's an episode of Doctor Who where the Doctor goes back to Da Vinci's workshop to find something, but he's like, oh, Da Vinci must be out. Oh well, I'll just grab this thing that I came from and then leave.
Guess I don't have to talk to him.
Da Vinci hasn't actually appeared in a Doctor Who episode yet, but it's established that the Doctor knows him because the Doctor's like, oh, my buddy, I'm gonna go visit my buddy Da Vinci and grab this thing.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because it very much seems to some extent like the obvious thing to do. So that's interesting that they've never done it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of historical figures, and the Doctor has met many of them. But like, it's weird that like he didn't meet Da Vinci in the episode where he goes to Da Vinci's workshop.
Right.
But he's only there for like a minute. He's like, I'm just gonna come here, grab this one thing, and go.
Right. So the monk then explains what his whole deal is to the Doctor, which includes, so he has apparently collected a fortune in compound interest through time travel, that he like made a really smart investment and then like went forward in time to collect on it.
Which is also interesting given like what is already known in the show to this point, which isn't a very long established history. It's only 2 seasons in. The time that he would have gone back to the bank, the Daleks have taken over Earth. This is the point in time where the Doctor left Susan with the Resistance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like she stayed behind to fight Daleks,
right?
And also because she fell in love with one of the Resistance fighters. But so if the monk made this investment in 1968, and then went back in 2168 to pick it up. The Daleks have taken over the world.
Right, so it's really like he should have come back like at least like 100 years before that, maybe?
Yeah, like you wouldn't have as much money, but also you don't have to deal with Daleks.
Right, who also, like, I can't imagine that's a very stable environment to which to be collecting on investments.
Yeah,
like,
no kidding.
and like stock, like I feel like, I don't know, like in that kind of crisis, like the stocks have probably lost value. Like I feel like that was not actually that smart.
Yeah, no.
We also learned that it's thanks to him that we have Stonehenge, that he gave the Britons an anti-gravitational lift.
Which, all right, I'll accept that.
Yeah, fine, sure, whatever, I guess.
Aliens did it.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, apparently, which is a fun nod to that conspiracy theory that we're literally going with the aliens built Stonehenge.
Here's the alien right here. Here's the spaceship time machine.
Yep, got him. Here we got him. And so now apparently we learned that his plan is to prevent the Norman conquest, which I guess was implied by his checklist, but now he's officially announced it.
Yeah.
The Vikings then bitch at each other, having finally woken up, about the fact that both of them got knocked out by elderly men. And
which, okay, I can see why that might annoy you.
Right, and because one of them's like, way to get knocked out by an old man, and the other one's like, well, so did you.
Yeah.
But so initially there's like the honorable Viking who wants to like go off and do something, and then wimpy Viking who's like, maybe we just stay here and like hide for a while.
And also it's a monastery, there's probably treasure in here.
And that's how he convinces the honorable one that the honorable one isn't like, ooh, treasure.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing because like normally like a monastery of this time period would have like, valuables in it. Except for apparently this specific monastery, which is a wreck. Like, I
mean, to be fair, it has a phonograph, so.
And also, it was raided by the Vikings previously, so maybe they already carted off everything of value.
Right. Although, again, if this was really like the monks had returned, you would think that they would have brought new objects of value. Yeah, like if there had been actually monks, that there would be like stuff there.
And he has, but what are they going to do with an electric griddle?
Right. Like bring this stuff back, and like Harold Hardrada's like, the fuck is this?
Yeah.
What are you doing here?
I mean, it's shiny, but what is it worth?
Right. Like, what do I do with this? Like, is this real gold? I feel like this is not real gold.
No.
Eldred, who is apparently now completely fine despite all of his heavy blood loss.
Yup.
And the fact that like the monk didn't really do anything. Like, it didn't really seem like he, like, spent a lot of time, like, bandaging him. He's just like, here's some penicillin. Here you go. Bye.
Take 2 penicillin. Don't bother me in the morning.
Right.
I have a Viking invasion to blow up.
Right. And, like, I'm not a doctor, but I feel like when you've been, like, seriously injured and have, like, wounds out of which blood is coming, I feel like doctors typically do more than hand you 2 penicillin and then you're fine.
Yeah, like even the doctor could tell you that, and he's not that kind of doctor.
Right. I'm also, I guess, not that kind of doctor.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Eldred sees the Vikings and then goes off to warn the others about the fact that there are Vikings in the monastery. Doctor and the monk.
This man is not well enough to be moved from the monastery, walks down to the village under his own power.
Yep. It's totally fine now.
Totally fine now. Penicillin does wonders, apparently.
Yep. But even without penicillin, we do in this episode, see, like, Edith of her concussion being, like joining an attack party. So, like, just, like, recovery is very speedy. Like, these are some hardy villagers, apparently.
What are they eating?
Right? Yeah, it's like, I want what they're having.
Yeah.
The doctor and the monk go and join Vicky and Stephen in the monk's TARDIS, which is clearly a better model, or at least in better shape than the doctor's.
It certainly is. The alien circuit's working. The steering is working. It is a newer model, although, so the doctor's, it's a bit of a running gag that's established later on once we know more of the Time Lords. But the doctor actually stole a TARDIS. He and Susan stole a TARDIS so they could run off and see the universe. They were not allowed to have it. And what they stole is like the equivalent of going down to the junkyard and hot wiring like old junker. Like the doctor's TARDIS is like, it's a Type 40, which is established as being like kind of like old and out of date, even in like the time period on the planet that the Doctor comes from. Like it's like we have advanced past this point, but the Doctor steals this old junker.
Right.
Yeah.
So it'd be like the equivalent of like you go to the junkyard and steal like a 90s Jeep or something.
Yeah, or there was this old, my him had like this really old car that he was like trying to keep running, and his brother was just like, you should junk this, and he's like no, I want to keep this thing running, and it's like, it's really not worth it. Do not.
I drove a car like that, which was actually a 90s Jeep for a bit. Not my car, but I didn't have a car at the time, but my neighbor would kind of let me use that because she just got a new, better car. But I would occasionally, use her 90s Jeep, which did not have a right mirror.
Yeah, that's about roughly what the Doctor's Type 40 is. Like,
yeah.
That's, the Doctor's TARDIS is not, I mean, it's like miraculous by like a human point of view. Like it can travel anywhere in time and space. It has no steering, but it can do that.
So the monk then at this point explains his rationale, which is that first of all, he is very sure that Harold would have been a really good king, which is very sweet. And also like it really just seems at this point like he's like a real like Harold Godwinson fanboy.
Which, yeah, I can see that. I'm a Harold Godwinson fangirl myself, but like,
I mean, yeah, fair, it's fine.
I'm not gonna try and stop the Norman conquest over it.
Right. So, and then also he has this like weird, he's like, no, and if we like kept Harold on the throne, then we wouldn't have like all of those wars where like the English are like making claims on the French throne, which I'll talk about later, the fact that that has nothing to do with the Norman conquest. And then also he's like, and also the English will have jet airliners by 1320. And I'm like, wait, they'll what?
Well, this is because he's like, because he says like, with a few technological pointers from me, he's like, I'm going to tell them how to do these things so they can have this technology way sooner. Like I am going to directly influence all of this shit. Right.
So like the next part is that like meet King Harold, be King Harold's best buddy, and teach him how to make a plane.
Yes, those are the steps that we didn't see.
Right. If only we'd seen the rest of the checklist.
Yeah, and the part that really got me is Shakespeare will be able to premiere Hamlet on TV. Okay, first off, without the influence of Norman French, Shakespeare's English would not exist.
Right. We're not worrying about that one apparently.
Yeah, no, and like right now, like in the present day of 1066, these villagers would be speaking like Old English, which is like a heavily Germanic tongue. Like the reason we hear it as English to our ears is a function of the TARDIS. The TARDIS. The TARDIS translates like the local languages for the passengers and crew of the TARDIS. So like that's like a convenient explanation for why we can always understand people.
I mean, I appreciate at least actually that that's an in-universe explanation that they've bothered with, because a lot of things just don't actually bother explaining that issue.
Oh yeah, they have some fun with it sometimes. Like like at one point, the Doctor and his companion Donna go back to ancient Pompeii right before Vesuvius erupts, because the Doctor always shows up at major historical events.
Right.
And she's like, wait. So it's translating our words into Latin, but what if I know like a phrase in Latin, like veni vidi vici? Like, what would happen if I said that to them? And the Doctor's like, I don't know. You'd probably sound like an idiot.
I mean, you would if you just randomly started saying veni vidi vici to like a bunch of people in like the year 70.
Yeah, and like,
what's your deal?
Yeah. Like one of them was like she goes up to a random Roman citizen and says it to him, and he's like, where are you from, Britannia?
Because also depending on how she pronounces it, like if you did the like ch sound, that's like church Latin, as opposed to it would be like a hard k if you were doing classical Latin.
Yeah. I mean, it was a ch sound, so I suppose that would also make it weird, but
be a giveaway.
But apparently, like, if you say something that sounds foreign to you, to someone, like, it'll just sound like you're saying something foreign to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the in-universe explanation. It's a function of the TARDIS.
Okay. I appreciate that, yeah, because it's very common in time travel things that they're just speaking languages, they're just speaking to each other, and it's like Old English and Modern English are not mutually intelligible, as anyone who has tried to read Beowulf would understand.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Like, you have to learn Old English like you would have to learn any other language. So yeah, so I do appreciate that there is apparently an in-universe explanation for why they can all understand one another.
Yes.
The monk convinces the Vikings that he is on their side, but that the Doctor and his companions are not. However, the Vikings don't, like, kill them. They just tie them up with very good knots.
Yeah, the Vikings, it's like, these Vikings sure know how to tie knots.
Why didn't they kill them? It would have made more sense in context for them to have killed, for the Vikings to have killed them.
It would make significantly more sense. Like, it's like why tie them up? They could escape. They can't escape because the knots are too good, but they could escape.
Right. Meanwhile, however, down in the village, Eldred has arrived and explained this whole thing, and they start wondering if the monk is really a Viking spy. So finally they figured out there's something weird happening with this monk.
Yeah, it's like the Doctor is like warned Edith of this Viking invasion in 2 to 3 days. And it's like, and the monk's like, oh, I'm expecting a shipment of parts for the monastery in 2 to 3 days. Please light these beacon fires for me. And Wolfnoth and Edith are like, this doesn't add up. This is suspicious.
And there's also this whole thing where the monk says that they should, like, light these beacon fires, and he's like, he's like, don't worry about it. And then the villagers are like, I feel like this is, like, for the Vikings, and that's a problem. Yeah,
it's like, this is the exact same time that the Doctor said that the Vikings were going to show up. So, wait.
Right. Stephen, meanwhile, learns why it's, like, complicated to change history. He has a whole musing. He's like, but what will happen to all the history books? And Vicky's like, well, I mean, in this time they haven't been written yet, so when they're written, they'll, like, say that they'll, you know, not have the Norman conquest in them.
Yeah, and he's like, maybe we should stop this from happening. Like, this is his big revelation. Like,
right, it's like, maybe it's not good to just change history willy-nilly because you feel like it, and, like, have a thing for King Harold.
Yeah, and later episodes back this up because like when people try to, like, fuck with history, like, bad things tend to happen.
Right.
Like there's an episode during the 9th Doctor's era where his companion at the time, Rose Tyler, her father Pete died when she was very young. So the Doctor, against his better judgment, agrees to take her to meet her father, because she never got to meet her father. He takes her to meet him on the day that he died. And so she saves him from dying, but then time starts falling apart around them. And because she's just created a massive paradox, and it's ultimately only resolved when Pete realizes, like, that he is the cause of all this, and so he goes and steps out in front of the car that was always meant to hit him anyway. And that sets the timeline back on track, but that was the only thing that would do it.
My theory about a lot of these, like, changing history things is that I think that a lot of these things are much more complicated than, like, oh, if we just change this one tiny thing, then we will completely change the course of history. Oh, yeah. And you kind of wonder, like, okay, I mean, say they'd stopped, like, this particular Norman conquest, like, who's to say that, like, they wouldn't have, like, tried again?
Yeah, and there's, like, there's this concept of, like, a fixed point in time, like a major historical event that, like, influences everything after that, like, you cannot change because it will break time, essentially.
Right.
And there is, like, a bit of gray area around that, like the episode where the Doctor and Donna go to Pompeii. Like, the Doctor's like, I can't stop Vesuvius from erupting, like bad shit would happen. And Donna's like, okay, you can't stop Vesuvius from erupting, but maybe you can, like, save one family. And so that's what the Doctor ultimately does. Like, he saves one family from the destruction. And that's, like, not a big enough change that would, like, break all of time.
Right. But this one guy not dying apparently was.
Yeah, the one guy in question is King Harold Godwinson, but.
Right. Well, you're right, but I know that that other woman's father apparently, that, like, him not dying apparently did.
Well, that's important because it's her interfering with her own personal timeline.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Him dying when she's very little is an intrinsic part of her personal past, and so by stopping that, she has created this paradox around herself.
Right. So, okay, that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, so I kind of think that like, okay, you would have like prevented the Norman conquest in 1066, and that it would have happened in 1069, and in the grand scheme of things, that wouldn't have actually made that much of a difference.
Yeah, that's probably fair too.
So that's kind of how I feel about a lot of these like changing history, that like you would have to do a lot to interfere to really change the course of things.
Yeah.
The Saxons managed to stop the Vikings, and they come up and they are able to untie the Vikings' very good knots, and then free them.
I'm not sure if Edith unties them. So the Saxons all come charging in. They find the Vikings and the monk. They chase them out. All the men chase them out, and Edith stays behind to untie the knots. And I'm not sure if she untied the knots or if she just cut through them.
Right.
Because she's holding a spear. It might.
She probably does that. Yeah. But yeah, there's also like there's a lot of like weird like running back and forth, which is clearly just like it's clearly everybody running back and forth across a very small set.
Oh yes.
To like simulate some like chasing action happening. And I'm definitely like, I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, I guess the import of this is all supposed to be that like they've defeated the Vikings and that they've like stopped the monk from his whole plan. But how that exactly happened is like slightly unclear to me.
Yeah. So what they ultimately do is, so the doctor and Vicky and Stephen are left alone with the monk's TARDIS, which he describes as a Saxon sarcophagus.
Yes. Right. Yes. Oh, he does say sarcophagus. Right.
Yeah. And I know that sometimes like, the English buried like important figures in like tombs, like Edward the Confessor, but I don't know that they would have called it a sarcophagus.
And it's also odd, and this is something I'll talk about later, in that in terms of like the location, it looks like it's supposed to be an altar.
Yeah, that too. So they go inside, and so the doctor, it's ultimately revealed that he took out the dimensional control, which is the thing that makes the TARDIS bigger on the inside. So that's when the monk finally gets back to it, like it's like as big on the inside as it looks on the outside. And so it's like, oh no, my TARDIS is very tiny now. And also I'm pretty sure his ammunition, the neutron bombs, were still in there somewhere. So he can't so he can't get to them now. Yeah.
And also I think he like makes it so that it can no longer, like he screws up the steering too, doesn't he? So that he can like, he's like stuck there.
I'm not sure if he did anything to the steering. I think the main thing is like he takes out the dimensional control and the monk can't even fit in it now. So steering is kind of a moot point.
Yeah, so he is stranded in 1066 and the doctor leaves this letter, which is basically like, maybe in a while, if I feel like you've learned your lesson, I'll come back and like let you out.
Yeah, which he never does, but the monk does pop up in like a few stories much later.
Okay.
He was kind of envisioned as like perhaps like a recurring adversary, but then Peter Butterworth died.
Oh yeah.
But then like much later on, they remembered, hey wait, we've established that time loads can regenerate.
Right.
Why not bring back the monk?
Keeps changing.
Why not bring back the monk with another actor? But they didn't do that until like 21st century.
Right.
Audience. His sort of MO that sets him apart as a villain is like he's trying to quote unquote improve history. Like the most recent episode he is involved in, he's jumping ahead to the 20th century. Winston Churchill was prime minister through World War II, but then right after World War II, he lost the election to the Labour candidate, whose name I don't remember, and then he got reelected again in the 50s. So the monk is is now Churchill's new campaign manager in 1946, and he's trying to get Churchill elected again. Churchill, at this point, knows the doctor. Like, he's met the doctor in another adventure, and so it's like the doctor's running around here too, and the Churchill's like, surely the doctor is on my side. But the doctor's trying to keep history going on its like actual course, which necessitates that Churchill has to lose. And so there's some conflict there. Like, my friend is working against me. This is sad.
Poor Churchill.
Churchill feels betrayed.
Aw, poor Churchill.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of the events. So we can now move on to the next segment, the vera et falso, where I'll talk a bit about what they got right and what they got wrong. First of all, Viking helmets. The horned helmet is a very common pop cultural depiction for the Vikings, but there is, however, no evidence that the Vikings actually wore horned helmets.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I will give it a slight pass because if they did not have horns, you cannot get that good line about a space helmet for a cow. But yes, no, it is inaccurate.
They did a decent job, though, on the ship, I think. Viking ships didn't originally have sails, but they did have ships that both had sails and space for a substantial number of rowers by the 10th century.
Yeah.
So
I think the most extras that are in any one scene is the scene of the rowers on the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't count them, but there is a 13th century Scandinavian historical narrative that refers to a ship that had room for 68 rowers. And we've then found ships that have corroborated that approximately is something that they were capable of. So yeah. I didn't count them, but I don't know, that sounds about right. Just 60-ish.
Sure.
Yeah. So not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they did a good job on that. On the Vikings, however, more broadly, so we'll talk more about a lot of the kind of details of what goes down in 1066. Yes. But it's a little odd how they depict Harald Hardrada's invasion, including the fact that it makes it seem like they're just going to sneak in and then quietly sneak down from Northumbria and then just sneak down all the way down to the south, just very quietly. It's no, I mean, basically they were assembling a fleet and that took some time, but once they landed, they pretty much immediately started raiding and capturing cities.
Yeah, there's no subtlety there.
Right. And it's also, I mean, and also that wasn't their strategy, that their goal was we're going to capture and take over these particular towns as we pass through them. It's not we're going to sneak by and then go over, go figure this out later. It's that they would be well, if we just take over this particular town, then we don't have to worry about that town.
Yeah. That
would have been the strategy. And so this sneaking around is a weird,
it is yeah. And the fact that this ship full of presumably trained Viking warriors falls to
right.
a few Saxon villagers with spears.
Right. And so it's this bizarre representation of a Viking invasion, because while Harald was able to defeat the Vikings, as we'll talk about in a bit, it was it's not it was super easy the way it's presented as here, and then the Vikings are terrified of the Saxons. It's what? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it makes sense after the first battle where it's there's only 2 Vikings left and they're we've got a whole village of Saxons after us and we're the only 2 left. But prior to that, I don't know why they're scared.
And also it just does, as you were saying before, it just doesn't seem that likely that this village of basically untrained peasants.
Pretty much.
Why would they, it just doesn't make sense that they would be able to defeat this Viking raiding party.
Yeah.
I mean, weird things happen, but it just seems not likely as a possibility.
Yeah.
And in fact, when the Vikings did do these raids as they were kind of entering, they were overall pretty successful.
Pretty much, yeah. They didn't.
Including they took over York.
They took over York again.
Yeah. Right. I mean, York is a Viking city. That's actually
York is York is their favorite. It's okay, we're gonna try invading England again. We'll start in York again because it's what we do.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite facts is that York is one of the towns where the name has nothing to do with the Latin name. The Latin name is Eboracum. York comes from the Scandinavian Jorvik.
Yes.
And there is therefore a Viking experience that you can go through in York called Jorvik, which has authentic smells.
Interesting. All right.
The ease with which these Vikings are defeated seems rather strange. Then, of course, there is the Saxon sarcophagus. And so
Yeah.
first of all, there's the bits that we discussed, but then also it's presented as though it's an altar. And you can kind of reconcile this in the sense of like, okay, maybe it's supposed to be an altar that there are saints' relics buried inside.
Sure. I mean, I guess that makes sense.
But then there's the additional problem that it's very, very simple looking. Like it has some very kind of simple carvings, but like it's not at all ornate. Like there's
Yeah.
not a lot going on.
Like the doctor at one point explicitly like calls it out as like, oh, this horrible slab of rock.
Right. Which is a bit unfair to pre-conquest English altars, since first of all, the ones that are carved do have carvings that are a bit nicer than this. And second, a number of them might have been this simple, but they would have been this simple because the expectation is that they would have been decorated with metalwork plates or with these very elaborately embroidered cloths that would have like gems and silver and gold threads and all sorts of things. A lot of these items have unfortunately not survived because, people came in and stripped them down for parts, basically.
Yeah. Henry VIII targeted the monasteries specifically.
Right. But it's another one of these things that if the villagers are like seeing this monastery and they're like, cool, some monks have come back, it would have seemed odd that the altar is so thoroughly unadorned.
Yeah.
But that also leads into the other, like, this is the biggest issue I feel like that I have, is what on earth is happening in this monastery and why is nobody noticing it? Because while monks to some extent are expected to, be focusing on God and contemplation and all that, they're not actually anywhere near this isolated. I mean, it's not far from a village. People would have expected to, at this point, probably like the monk, especially in this kind of context with this rural setting, the monks would have been expected to be like preaching sometimes. And people would have been saying like, can I send my kid to like your monastery for you to teach him? And like, maybe he can like stay and become a monk one day.
Uh-huh.
And also like people would be making donations. People would be like, can I like be buried there? So it's just like these villagers would have found it weird that they'd only seen this one monk who seems to be trying really hard to avoid them and keep them out of the monastery.
Yeah. That does remind me of one thing I did like, though. It only really comes up once, but when the doctor when Stephen and Vicky are leaving the village to go up to the monastery the first time, Edith and Wolfnoth like say, "God be with you." So like,
yeah,
there's an actual reference to religion.
Yeah,
and Stephen, who is like an atheist from the future, like is a little hesitant, but ultimately says it back because it's the polite thing to do.
And they clearly think it's like a little weird that he was so hesitant, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And I do also appreciate that they also seem to take religion seriously, and that like they clearly have a lot of respect for this monk, essentially just by virtue of the fact that he is a monk. Like they keep trying to like say hello to him. They keep like giving him these baskets of food.
Yeah, and the monks and the monk is like, gosh, sure seems like a nice day for solitary contemplation.
Cough. So the way that they're trying to relate to the monk actually to some extent makes sense, but in reality, I feel like they would have realized long before this that there was something up in terms of how strenuously he was trying to avoid all of that, especially because, there's the singing, there's supposed to be other monks. It's not like he's claiming to be an isolated hermit, which would have been a much better idea.
Yeah, a much better cover.
Yeah, like I feel like that would have been much less suspicious in terms of, his attempts to like not talk to anybody.
I mean, it's one of many things that like does not feel that well thought through of his plan.
Right. Yeah, and that like he has like just like what 24/7 like Gregorian chants playing on a phonograph, and that's the only way he's like convincing them that there's other monks there.
It's not 24/7. He like turns it on and off at like the proper times to be for those things to be happening. So at least there's that.
But that's really all he's doing. Like, you'd think at least at some point it would have occurred to him to, like, I don't know, like grab a fake mustache and sometimes pretend to be a different monk.
Yeah. He has, like, extra habits lying around. The doctor wears one at one point, but...
Yeah.
that might just be a change of clothes for him.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's that dynamic is very odd. I also wanted to make a brief, just miscellaneous comment on periodization, which is that, so Stephen does describe Da Vinci as having lived in the Middle Ages. And I'm assuming that most people are supposed to like listen to that and be like, Stephen's dumb. Obviously, he lived in the Renaissance. I, however, have this like weird appreciation for it though, because first of all, periodization is basically something that we just made up. There's nothing really inherently that different. It's not like you woke up one day in, the year 1500 and are like, yes, the Middle Ages is over. I am in the Renaissance and my life is completely different now.
Yeah.
Which is what people often seem to think. But the way I sometimes describe it based on Jacob Burckhardt's Age of the kind of Renaissance book is that, you woke up one day in the year 1500 and all of a sudden you had a personality for the first time.
Sure.
But yeah. So first of all, in reality, there's a lot of continuity between what we call the Middle Ages and what we would call the Renaissance or the early modern period. But second, the traditional starting point of the Renaissance is completely different based on essentially what region you happen to be talking about. And so in Italy or the Italian peninsula, you'd usually place it like, let's say early 15th century as being the start of the Renaissance, which would make Da Vinci's entire lifetime Renaissance, since he was born in 1452. But England, usually they link the periodization to the transition from the Plantagenets to the Tudors, so in 1485. So still during Da Vinci's lifetime, but not quite at the beginning of his lifetime. It's, as I said, something that I assume is just supposed to be like, haha, Stephen did it stupid, but I appreciate it as a like comment on periodization.
Yeah. Stephen is not bright, but he does come up with like these occasional like bursts of insight.
Yeah.
He's not as smart as like previous companions were. But then the previous companions were like literally another Time Lord and a couple of school teachers. So like people who are paid to be smart.
Yeah, so it makes sense that they would be smarter than him, but
yeah, I believe he was a spaceship captain before he got captured by the mechanoids.
I mean, so you think not that dumb, right?
Yeah, I mean he's a decent pilot. He just doesn't know his early Earth history.
Right. So as I said, I'm going to take this as a comment on the fluidity of periodization, whether or not that's what was intended.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
However, the final thing that I want to comment on in this section, the Vera et Falso, is this assumption that basically by stopping the Norman conquest, you would have, I guess, prevented the 100 Years' War.
Yeah, that's something.
Because it seems like the monk is under the impression that these claims that the English kings had to the French throne are related to, come from William the Conqueror.
Come from the Dukes of Normandy.
Which they do not. The French kings would have had no interest in the Dukes of Normandy, inheriting from them at any point. It comes from these later marriages of English kings to French princesses. And in fact, the immediate justification for the 100 Years' War was a quite recent one, in that Edward III, who is the person who started really claiming, like, I am the rightful heir to the French throne, it was his mother, Isabella, who was a daughter of Philip IV of France.
Yeah, and all of Philip IV's sons died childless, and so, like, since the French throne can only pass to a man, because that's how it works, like, it went to a fairly distant cousin, and Edward's like, I'm Philip IV's grandson, I'm right here, I should be king. Right,
which is, fairly legit as these things go. As we'll get to, it says it's certainly at least as legit as any of the claims in 1066 to the English throne.
That's how it would work in English law.
Yeah.
So, but not French law.
Yeah, the problem in France is that they basically dragged up this old law about how inheritance can't pass through women. They basically resurrected this to basically solve a different inheritance dispute.
And the way I understand it is it was also at least in part because they were like, we don't want to be ruled by an Englishman.
Right. That was a kind of at least like side benefit. Yeah. Of like, we don't want to deal with these people. And in general, like that is a standard potential issue in European royalty, is that you marry daughters off to other kings and you don't want those other kings coming back and ruling your country.
Yeah.
And so that is definitely like a general issue that you might have. There's no reason to think that the theoretical line of kings descended from Harold Godwinson wouldn't still have ended up marrying members of the French royal family. The said French princesses might have had a slightly harder time in that they wouldn't have been able to enjoy the fact that the English royal court basically just all spoke French.
Yeah.
But, other than that,
you have to learn a whole new, not pretty at all sounding language.
Right. But, it's not like the King of France would have cared about like his daughter bitching about the fact that she had to learn like weird German.
Yeah.
So there's no reason not to suspect that marriage or similar marriages wouldn't have still happened. Therefore, something like the 100 Years' War still wouldn't have happened, even if it didn't happen at exactly that date or something.
I haven't really tracked it that closely, but I'm pretty sure the Godwin line like dies out pretty quickly after the Norman conquest.
Right.
Just naturally.
Who knows if like Harold would have happened to have like had a conveniently timed son, or if they wouldn't have just still been like in a similar succession mess that still could have ended up with the Normans being in charge, within a decade.
Sure.
So I'm not sure that the monk's plan entirely makes sense for a number of reasons.
And it's kind of addressed in universe that like even in universe with all these rules about how time travel works in Doctor Who, his plan still doesn't make sense.
Right.
He shows up later, his plans still don't make sense, and the doctor's essentially given up on trying to explain to him why his plans don't work, and he's just trying to stop him.
He's like, I can't even deal with you anymore.
Yeah. Well, and like the doctor especially like gets mad at the monk when one of the monk's bigger fuck ups directly results in the death of the doctor's great grandson.
Right.
So he's beyond the point of trying to reason with him after that.
Yeah, that's fair. We can now move into the next section, the Historia ad Veritas, where we talk about a real historical event or phenomenon. I want to talk about basically why England is a fucking mess in 1066, and feel free to add in some extra details about your buddy Harold.
I love this story.
Yes. Basically, the short version, I feel like, is that it's really all Edward the Confessor's fault.
Well, I mean, it's partly Edward the Confessor's fault, but I can also see why he did the things he did the way he did.
Yeah.
It's a series of decisions that went very poorly.
Right, because essentially the upshot is when he dies in 1066, he hasn't actually made any particularly clear provisions for the succession.
Partially by design, because like there are two very good claimants, and he really doesn't want to deal with them fighting each other while he's alive.
Right. So it's something that's understandable, but also is obviously going to lead to things being a bit of a disaster the second he dies, which is then exactly what happens.
Yeah.
So Harold Godwinson is the son of Godwin, who's the Earl of Wessex, and also he happens to be the brother of Edward's wife, Edith.
Yes.
He becomes the Earl of East Anglia at the time of this marriage. And this then, however, this is not like an idyllic relationship between in-laws. It gets complicated. Part of the kind of instigating issue seems to have been a dispute over the Archbishopric of Canterbury, which often doesn't bode well in English history.
No, not at all. As I understand it, like, Godwin was, like, an extremely powerful vassal of Edward's who, like, had, for all practical purposes, like, Godwin alone had more power than Edward could muster if he didn't have Godwin on his side.
Right.
And so
which
that's
is never a position you want to be in if you're the king.
It's really not. So a lot of Edward's decisions are like made through like, okay, I have to keep Godwin happy or I am no longer king, which is why he marries Edith, which is why he ends up giving Harold so much power.
But then he kind of swings the pendulum in the other direction in terms of being like, well, but I don't have too much power. And so then when one of his relatives is selected as the next Archbishop of Canterbury, he's like, nah, we're not going to do that.
No.
Basically, this kind of devolves into a larger conflict, and Godwin and Harold and some other brothers end up getting exiled. And Edward even then repudiates Edith and packs her off to a nunnery for a bit, as you do.
As you do.
He did subsequently forgive them. He restores Edith as queen and restores all of the assorted Godwins to their earldoms. At this point, you know, he seems to have been, at this point, kind of reconciled himself to the fact that, you know, all right, I'm not really going to be able to do much about the Godwins. And some people would generally say that at this point, he's kind of assuming one of them will probably succeed him.
Yeah. And it's probably going to be Harold, frankly.
At his death, he in some way kind of commended Edith and the kingdom to Harold's protection. It's unclear exactly how he meant this in terms of whether he literally meant you should be my successor or whether he meant this as a kind of temporary thing. You know, there's really no way entirely of knowing.
Also, part of his thinking is like, okay, if I have an heir with Edith, that means that there's going to be a Godwin on the throne either way, because my kid will be Godwin. But also, he will be a child, and he will have to deal with Uncle Harold. So I'm just not going to have a kid. I'm saving the pain.
Right, but it's also, of course, not impossible that he's sort of maybe hoping for the best that, like, who knows, maybe Edith is pregnant. Like, maybe Harold, you know, will be on board with this because like he would be basically ruling for a long time as like the de facto king. Who knows? Then you have the Norman claim and the Bayeux Tapestry, which I highly recommend seeing for when we can travel again in 10 years or whatever.
An important note about the Bayeux Tapestry is that it was commissioned by William. So it has a very pro-William bent.
Oh, yes.
It's like how Shakespeare's patron was Elizabeth Tudor, so all
the Tudors look really good.
Yes, are all like leading up to like, okay, this person is good and this person is bad, and ultimately the Tudors are the best.
Right, and so like all of this stuff that he like makes up about Richard III to like
Richard III sucked and Henry Tudor was our savior.
Right, and it's like, oh wow. I feel like no one who met Henry Tudor would come to that impression, but sure.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, so, you know, the Bayeux Tapestry is very much representing what is William's official position about how things went down. So that is clearly a bias that it has, and we genuinely have no idea to what extent these things happened or not, but they're certainly what William wanted people to think happened.
Yeah.
So according to the tapestry, Edward had designated William as his successor and even sent Harold to Normandy to inform William of this. While hanging out over there, the tapestry makes pains to add in that he was knighted by William and swore an oath of fealty to him.
William is an actual blood relative of Edward's instead of just a relative by marriage.
Yes, let's see, I wrote this down because it's a huge pain in the ass. Edward's mother, Emma, and William's father, Robert I of Normandy, are cousins.
Yes. Edward did not have many surviving relatives any closer than that. He was the youngest and last son of Ethelred the Unready.
Right.
Like, his older brother Edmund was king for like not quite a year before he got overthrown by Canute the Great.
Yeah, and there's also a complicated added wrinkle to this that we'll get to in terms of that Canute the Great was married his mother.
Yep.
And
sort of adopt.
Is his, So Canute is his half-brother.
Yes. And Canute sort of kind of adopted Edward, but also not really. It's a mess.
Yeah, but it was why Edward kind of coming to the throne, even though he was the son of Ethelred the Unready, it's why he basically had a very easy path to the throne when Harthacnut died without children, because they were half-brothers and that was an okay relationship, basically.
And Harthacnut's other brothers were already dead by that point.
Right. So according to the tapestry, you have this emphasis on the fact that Harold swore this oath of fealty, and so it presents then his later claim to the throne as being kind of in contravention of this oath, which is a big deal culturally speaking.
Yeah.
But again, there's no way to know if it happened or B, what precisely that oath would have meant in context. It then actually depicts Edward on his throne as basically vaguely pointing at Howard, which is this sort of, take care of my wife and my kingdom scene. So so it's interesting that the tapestry still includes it, but doesn't actually have any explicit text explaining precisely what it's supposed to mean, which is a really interesting decision.
Yeah, I think everyone would have maybe have heard that story, and so William wants to incorporate it while still like holding to his chain of events.
Yeah. So the tapestry is very much, trying to present this particular narrative. It does, however, I believe, somewhat ignore the additional claimant to the throne, which is, of course, this Viking invasion by Harald Hardrada. Because,
the great-grandson of Canute the Great via his oldest son, who never ruled England.
So it's actually this, and so it's also this, complicated thing that Magnus, who was Harold's nephew and co-ruler, he and Harthacnut had just agreed that they'll be each other's heirs.
Yeah, it's one of those.
As a fun bonding thing, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's the main basis of Harald Hardrada's claim, is this agreement that Magnus and Harthacnut made, even though it was pretty clear at the time that Harthacnut never intended that to really include the throne of England, and that he was assuming it would go to his brother Edward.
Yes.
But Edward's now dead, so arguably,
why not?
Harald Hardrada's claim is better than Harold Godwinson's. Potentially.
Everyone's claim is better than Harold's. It's just that Harold is in a position to actually act on it.
Right. He's in a position to act on it, and also he's somebody who has been there for a long time, and all of the other earls know him and know what they're getting. I'm sure to some extent because he's been around and very much involved the kind of running of the kingdom. Yeah. He represents stability to some extent.
He knows what's going on.
Yeah. So they very quickly crown him king, which, makes sense given that to some extent they don't really care about who has the better claim. They care about what's
who can
going
do the job the best.
Who's going to do the best job, and who's, as I said, really going to keep things as stable as possible. But Harold, in a lot of ways, represents continuity, even if he's the person who, blood-wise, has the worst claim.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of initial thing, is that, all right, so Harold Godwinson is now king. But he's very much aware that there are these other claimants, and in particular, he knows that William is en route.
William wants to, he knows that William's planning an invasion, and also the Pope has sided with William. William has gone to the Pope. Well, he sent emissaries to the Pope. He didn't go down himself.
Right.
But he goes to the Pope, makes his case, and the Pope is like, okay, I'll side with you. And so William's forces are bolstered by people from all over Europe who are trying to get on the Pope's good side.
Right. And he does this in part by he makes a claim that William swore an oath on relics to honor and support his claim to the throne.
You mean Harold?
Yes. William claims that Harold swore this oath.
Yes.
And that's part of how he gets the Pope on his side, is being but Harold is going against this oath he made over sacred relics. And the Pope's like, oh, we don't want that.
No, that's not cool.
Yeah, so that's part of, how he's able to get the Pope on his side. But Harold knows that he's got this invasion planned and has an army gathered. But the problem, in fact, is basically that the army doesn't come soon enough. Yeah. That he's basically sitting around expecting this invasion, and the invasion doesn't come, probably because the weather sucked, basically, because that's usually why fleets don't bother sailing when you think they should.
Yeah, that's the explanation that I've always heard.
Harold basically disbands his army and treks back to London. And then right then, Harald Hardrada, in alliance actually with Harold Godwinson's brother.
Oh yeah, that's another fun side quest of this whole story. The year before, Tostig and all of the Tostig and some nobles in Northumbria raised up in revolt against Edward, and Harold helped Edward put them down instead of siding with his brother, which is. So Tostig gets exiled and ends up in Norway. And so that's part of why Harold was on such good terms with Edward at the moment of Edward's death, is because he sided with his king against his brother. But
which he probably does in part because he's kind of figuring Edward still doesn't have kids. I'm on his good side. I have a decent chance of succeeding him, and that might be more secure than siding with my brother in this half-cocked rebellion.
Yeah, and Tostig, who is understandably very annoyed, ends up, kind of at the ear of Hardrada.
Right. so they're buddies, and they now invade England, and Harold Godwinson then has to like very quickly reconstitute his army and drag them all the way back up north to Northumbria in order to defeat Harold Hardrada.
And he does defeat Harold Hardrada, which is like a legitimate feat of logistical brilliance.
Oh yeah.
Harold Godwinson was like an awesome general, like
yeah,
and he does not get enough credit for that because he's most famous for losing a battle. But
right. And this is then the part where the monk's plan actually sort of makes sense, not in terms of the longer term impacts, but in terms of would Harold have been able to defeat William if if he hadn't had to worry about this Viking invasion? And the answer is actually maybe. I mean, because he had to haul ass 200 miles north and then haul ass 200 miles back south because then.
And he also manages to like, despite the like excellent timing of like William sets sail about the time that Hardrada makes landfall, like
yeah,
the fact that Harold is able to be there at Hastings and meet them at like despite all of that, like is incredible.
Yeah, and so it's really pretty impressive on his part, and also has a lot to do with basically poor timing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so basically if like the weather had been better and William had showed up in like May or whatever, like he was supposed to, then it's very possible Harold would have defeated William and then several months later defeated Harold Hardrada and not had to worry about any of this.
Yeah.
So
and he would have solidified his own claim by being like, yo, I beat you guys, like back off.
Right. So, and who knows what would have happened long term? Like, there were still Normans with claims, and even if William had been killed, and and who knows whether Harold would have had a son, etc.
And William had his sons, and
right. But but certainly, like, it is not impossible that specifically Harold's loss at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 could have been prevented by basically saving him from having to deal with this Viking attack.
Yeah.
Also, fun facts about Harold's death. The traditional account often describes Harold as being killed through an arrow to the eye.
Yes.
This, however, is not actually in the earliest account, which is a Norman source, the Carmen de Hastingai Prolio, the Song of the Battle of Hastings. And this just states that Harold was killed and dismembered by 4 knights.
That's evocative.
Right?
Yeah. The way I've always heard it is that the image in the Bayeux Tapestry is like Harold with the arrow to the eye, but like that might just be symbolism for it. Yeah, he died. Look, it's a dead guy who is supposed to be Harold.
Yeah. Well, so it's also interesting because the inscription that says basically Harold, like here King Harold died, is written in such a way that it is over 2 different dying figures. And one of them is a guy with the arrow going through the eye, and the other is a guy being trampled by a horse.
Both fun ways to go.
Both fun ways to go. And there is actually a debate about which of these is supposed to be Harold. Then related to this, at some point in the 19th century, some restorers apparently thinking that Harold was definitely killed by the arrow, but that the guy lying on the ground was actually Harold, they stitched in an arrow to his eye. That then later restorers are like, that's not supposed to be here, and unstitched it.
All right. Historical revisionism in action.
Right. So some fun things happening with the Bayeux Tapestry, which, again, I highly recommend everyone look up online. And also you can look up the Bayeux Tapestry memes, which are also
one of my other medieval historian friends recently bought a Bayeux Tapestry replica that she just has hanging on one wall of her bedroom.
That sounds kind of delightful.
It does.
I have and was looking at today the not exactly a replica, but the little booklet where you can unfold.
Oh, yeah.
But yes, I was looking through that today to kind of look at the precise inscriptions and all that.
I like it.
With that, we can now move on to our next section, the Fabula Nostra, where we talk about a movie, show, whatever, that we might want to create inspired by this. I'm intrigued by this time meddler figure and have been thinking about what other medieval events I could at least see somebody wanting to try to change or prevent. And the one that I actually can think of, especially from a kind of 21st century standpoint, is that I could see that except for the whole changing history is bad thing, some people might think it would be a good idea to prevent the Crusades. A lot of people died for basically no good reason. I mean, in addition to like the war not having accomplished anything, like within, I mean, like the first, like they took over in the first crusade, but like within a couple hundred years, they'd lost everything. So like it didn't even have a point except for a lot of people having died, both in war and civilians being murdered, including the fact that, you know, starting already in 1096, sometimes the Crusaders would just be like, oh, well, we're supposed to go kill like the non-Christians abroad, but like we've got some here too. Let's just like murder these Jews for no reason.
Yeah.
And also, you know, you could argue that like Muslim-Christian or Eastern-Western relations were damaged by the Crusades in ways that have later impact, arguably.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, certainly didn't do anything good.
Like, I feel like Saladin in particular, like, would have worked well with Western rulers, perhaps, if they weren't all trying to kill each other.
Yeah, like, I feel like if, like, Saladin and Richard the Lionheart were, like, on the same side, like, you know, maybe they could have, like, done something good for once.
Yeah.
Who knows? So I was thinking about the idea of somebody trying to prevent the Crusades. And the problem is, of course, is that there are an immense amount of factors that go into why the Crusades end up getting declared, and you obviously can't like solve those by fixing one thing. Yeah. So I'm taking the lesson from this serial of choosing one just really overly simplistic route by which somebody might try to prevent the Crusades, which is that the Pope who first called the Crusade, Urban II, was actually facing an anti-Pope, Clement III, since this is still kind of in the midst of investiture controversy stuff. So Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, keeps saying, like, no, here's my Pope, like, take this Pope instead.
Yeah. It's like, I can appoint my own bishops, I can appoint my own Pope. I'm the Roman Emperor, what you gonna do about it?
Right. I could see this idea of somebody basically deciding, I'm going to prevent the Crusades from being called by essentially having Urban, say, kind of waylaid and captured or killed, and he never is able to actually function as Pope, and the anti-Pope Clement III ends up actually kind of successfully being the sole Pope. I feel like I then would kind of have it such that like this doesn't actually prevent the Crusades, it just maybe like delays them by 2 years or something.
Yeah, like Clement calls them instead.
Like Clement calls them instead, or like then Clement dies and whoever like comes next, say, is a sort of compromise candidate and that person calls the Crusades, like who knows?
Yeah.
But that I think that actually, as I was saying before, I think this idea that like you change this one thing and that alters the entire course of history, I think that the course of history is often a lot more complicated than that, and that this is certainly an event where, yeah, the kind of factors that led to the Crusade being called were still very much there, and if Urban hadn't done it, some other pope would have soon enough. I like the idea of somebody doing this and it changes history, but only in this way that ultimately, basically only like 5 medieval historians would give a shit about.
Yeah, I'd be one of the 5, but
I mean, I
would want to see that. Like,
yeah.
The thing that I was inspired to try and make from this was also sort of like kind of a historical event that only historians really know about. And it's the absolutely buck-wild series of events that is England in 1066. So I would do like essentially just a mini series of all the shit that goes down that like leads up to 1066 with Edward and Harold and William and the ultimate conflict. And I don't think I would include Hardrada as a viewpoint character just because I want his invasion at Stamford Bridge to come out of nowhere.
Right, that would be an interesting, yeah.
It's like you build up this conflict between Harold and William, like Harold and William were both expecting, and then suddenly out of nowhere Vikings. And so like I just kind of want to make
which is like almost a Game of Thrones move.
Kinda, yeah. Like in much the way that a lot of Game of Thrones is like inspired by real world history, like sort of take a dramatic cue from that and like Vikings out of nowhere. Suddenly, Vikings. I would avoid and I would pass the if Decker test by having Edith play a fairly major role and not die.
Hey.
And also Matilda of Flanders. Is that? Am I thinking of the right one? William the Conqueror's wife.
Yes, and also I feel like, I don't know, depending on how far back you go, could be interesting to have Emma like in flashbacks at least. I can't remember, when did she die?
I don't remember, but it's a while.
It could be interesting in flashbacks, like, this woman that is very much kind of like at the heart in some ways of a lot of these like weird machinations. Like I think I would actually love a show about her too.
Yeah.
I mean, like, this is bizarre that she's like married to one king of England and then this other one takes over and she's like, nope, I'm going to marry this one now.
Yeah.
Bold move.
Bold.
Yeah, I'll be honest, in terms of my like weird Crusades adaptation, I still actually would have to think about how to pass the if Decker test because I have all of these like posts, which sort of like limits the, yeah. But there actually was this like whole thing, this whole like conflict going on where Urban II, basically just to like fuck with Henry IV, was backing his wife who was like claiming that he was beating her. Or actually, like, I think she might have like claimed basically claimed like marital rape.
Fun.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yeah. Urban was backing her, but it didn't really have anything to like do with her. It was actually just to like fuck with Henry IV.
Yeah, that sounds on brand.
Yeah. We can now move to rating this on a scale of 1 to 5 based on whatever criteria you see fit. So I think I'm going to give this a 3. I definitely really enjoyed it and it makes me want to watch more Doctor Who. But in terms of the actual historical bits, I feel like it does leave something to be desired in some areas.
That's fair. I'd ratchet it up to a 4. It's fairly historically, well, Doctor Who tends to be all over the board with historical accuracy, despite being like originally conceived as an educational show. Like it does get some aspects of history right. This is one of the episodes that is like centered around a real historical event. Like, and I think bonus points for one that's not especially well known. Like people have heard of it, like even Stephen has heard of the Battle of Hastings.
Right, and Stephen like doesn't know shit.
Not nearly as many people know about the Battle of Stamford Bridge or the lead up to it.
Yeah.
Even though, in my opinion, I think that's almost more interesting. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 because I think it's depicting an actual historical event and one that a lot of people don't know about it at. It's very important for the history of the show because it establishes that there are other time travelers. Like there are other, they don't call them Time Lords yet, but there are other members of the Doctor's race who have other TARDISes. And it also like establishes like, the whole type of plot of like someone tries to interfere with the history and the Doctor has to stop them.
Yeah.
Which becomes like, a recurring theme because it's a good thing to have in a time travel show. But
yeah, which is a really interesting dynamic. I will say also the other reason I'm keeping it at a 3 is also because I don't love the gender dynamics.
The gender dynamics improve greatly over time. This is a product of 1965.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think the gender dynamics are bad for 1965 necessarily. Yeah. But watching it as a 2020 person, they're not great.
That's true. And there are even other serials around this time period that do it better. Like the one where they go back to ancient Rome. I feel like there are 2 reactions one can have to the news that you're going to meet the Emperor Nero. There's, oh no, Emperor Nero's not a good dude. Maybe he's someone we want to avoid. Or you could be like Victory, who's like, fuck yeah, we get to meet Nero. He's like a famous historical figure. I'm into this. Let's go.
I feel like I would actually have that reaction.
I would too. Like Vicky and I are on the same page there.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't want to be led before the Emperor Nero in chains or anything like that. But I'd be okay being at the same party as Nero.
Yeah. Maybe being one of the people that Nero forces to sit through one of his violin concertos. But
right.
He's not very good, but you have to clap because he's the emperor.
So, yeah, and I have a feeling also to some extent, I wonder if this particular episode is sort of suffering from the loss of a companion who is an actual adult woman who was educated.
This is the first episode that doesn't have that because Barbara's not there.
Right. And so it's just like this weird dynamic where it's just like Vicky being talked down to all the time by two adult men.
Yeah.
And then there's this like one medieval woman who like, you know, you're like hanging out with for like an entire episode before you even know her name.
Yeah.
And she also like, I don't know, she's like very weirdly this kind of like side character, and like all of the medieval people again kind of seem vaguely dumb. Like,
I mean, yeah. I mean, and since the focus is on our time travelers, like at any point in time they go to, like the people they meet kind of have this side character dynamic because they're going to be around for one story and then you probably aren't going to be back to visit them again.
Yeah. You know, I'm definitely interested in watching more Doctor Who. I think the concept is really interesting, and I think it's interesting to see what they do with the
we absolutely should. Yeah.
Yeah. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on and for introducing me to Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's a wild ride.
Yeah, so yes, hope to have you back on for a future episode. In the meantime, where could listeners find you on the internet if they so desired?
I have projects in the works, but none of them are in a viewable state.
Okay.
At present, I tweet occasionally at Lizzie Strider, but really, when I have things to show from my projects, I will mention them on future episodes.
Sounds good.
I have nothing now.
Sounds good. And you're in the Media-eval Facebook group, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I post there sometimes.
Yeah, so people will also see you there. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review Media-eval on Apple Podcasts, and I will read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. Hint, hint, listeners, you should write one that I'll read in a future episode. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval Pod and join our aforementioned Facebook group. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Ifdecker. If you have any questions or suggestions, I would love to hear from you via email at media.evalpod@gmail.com. And thank you for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
Bye.